Okay, thank you everyone for coming. My name is Stuart Waiton. I'm the chairperson of the Scottish Union for Education. I don't know if you know who we are, but we set up 2 years ago, as the banner behind me says, because we want to promote education and we're concerned about indoctrination, of which we see both things being associated. So that is our aim, is to try and help parents in particular, but also teachers and lecturers and other people who want to have a great Scottish education system, which I don't think we have at the minute, and also people who are concerned about elements of the politicization of various aspects of what's taking place in schools. And one of the issues that we are interested in, obviously, which connects to this, you can see that, this is the pamphlet that Dr. Jenny Cunningham, who is here with us, wrote, which is trying to look at the promotion of transgender ideology in schools and what's wrong with that. It's a very short pamphlet because it just says everything. That's not true. It's a little bit more elaborate than that, but there are lots of problems with that. And so we have a Substack. So please do check that out, because that's how we basically make the small amount of money that we do have is from generous donations from people and from the Substack. The main thing that we obviously are all champing at the bit to talk about, I suspect, is the Supreme Court ruling. I am champing at the bit to talk about it, but before we do that, I am going to talk to Malcolm a bit. So the way this is going to work, as it does with various people, we've had a few people on, Graham Linehan, for example, Lionel Shriver, and other greats,
Oh,
as Malcolm will prove to be over the next hour and a quarter. He has to leave at about 7:15. So I'm going to chat to him for no more than half an hour and then open it to you guys. If you feel like putting your cameras on, please do, so they can see your lovely faces and get a sense of the audience. And I'll come to you in about 30 minutes. I'm going to chat to Malcolm about his childhood and his education, how he ended up where he is today. And then, of course, we're going to talk about the ruling and what it means, because I almost felt like I should send everybody a little baby bottle of champagne so they could all pop it together and start drinking. I'll just have to start drinking a little bit later than usual tonight because we're all here. Okay, so just a little bit. I'm going to say a little bit about Malcolm because I'm a bit of a fan, and I know it's kind of it's the thing to do when you are interviewing someone, is you have to say how wonderful they are, even if you don't think it's true. But I have to say, Malcolm's Substack, in my opinion, is the best Substack that I've come across. And what he does, if I'm assuming most people here know Malcolm and have read his Substack, but I'm gonna big him up anyway, because he does what so few journalists seem to do, and he does it regularly and seemingly with ease, which is that he mixes humor. And I often laugh out loud. I was going to try and show a picture of him, showing a picture of Les Dawson in a wig, and some of the comments he makes around that, with which are often some people might say cruel, but I would say often quite insightful, as well as being funny. And he mixes an excellent deep dive into individuals' biography, history, and also a kind of wider, pretty knowledgeable sense of what's happened in the past in society, and also what's happening at the minute. I don't think Stephen Fry probably likes his Substack very much. I'm not going to say anything about that. I always think I panic and wonder if Malcolm's going to get sued for anything he says. But he evidences everything that he does look at. He has also been, as far as I can tell, quite a significant individual in the LGB Alliance, which is a very important organization, especially at the minute. And most recently, people, if they've read it, Malcolm's done an excellent examination of Channel 4's fairly despicable representation of the Supreme Court, and again did it in the way that he does by looking in great detail at the individuals involved, their past, their politics to a certain extent, and aspects of the problems that we can see with the trans ideology. So that is obviously going to be the key thing that we're going to focus on later, and I imagine that will be the questions. And the thing I am interested about, and which hopefully I want you guys to think about, is what do we do now? Because while I'm very pleased about the ruling, I also think there's a long way to go, because this is quite, to some extent, quite narrow and legalistic. But anyway, we will get onto that. So welcome, Malcolm. Thank you very much for coming. I'm just going to kick it off, as I say, with a question really about your past, your childhood, and your education, because we are an education organization. So I'm always interested to find out how people who I'm talking to became the knowledgeable individuals that they are. So over to you. What were you like as a kid? Did you go to school? How was it?
Yeah, I was really into school. My family moved from Paisley down into the countryside of Ayrshire, and they did. So this would be the late '60s, and I remember the working class family. So when my father said that he was buying a house and he was going to have to get a mortgage, the rest of the working class family were horrified and said, "You are absolutely insane! A mortgage?" And because that was what it was like in those days, and the mortgage was actually £2,000, which sounds ludicrous now. It's a big house in Dalry, ramshackle house in this little town of Dalry, which they then spent the next 40 or 50 years constantly developing and putting new windows in and new doors and new walls. So I was surrounded by dust most of the time at home, and but I went to school in Dalry, nice, really good, working class school, and then it was strange because I was just it was maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years after comprehensives were introduced to the Garnet Valley, and we were all bussed up from three different towns in the Garnet Valley to what was then Garnock Academy. But because the old schools, which had been excellent, and you could tell they were excellent because all their teachers and all their departments and everything had been brought together into this one big school. And so we got taught classics. I mean, I learned Greek from a fantastic classics teacher who was really passionate about it. She just loved the Greeks. And of course, at the beginning, as a teenager, beginning to think about sexuality, the Greeks had a particular appeal to me. Well, tell me all about Socrates again, Mrs. Lamont. And so I got a really good education, but it was a rough school, and you knew that they knew there had been better things, because in the music department, for example, there was a big store where they had all the costumes and everything for the Mikado and other performances that had been done in the old schools, but we didn't do anything like that anymore. So there was already this sense that really good quality schools that had pushed kids really, hard. They'd been replaced by this new kind of school, and he was a lovely guy, our headmaster, but he was so socialist kind of in the old school that he didn't believe in prizes. So he didn't like the idea that there were prizes for athletics. So in the old school, you could go and they had, the Dalry High still had the big sort of notice board with all the dukes, all the people who'd been the boy and girl who'd been the best in the school, this whole sense of excellence. There was nothing like that in Garnock Academy. No, everyone must proceed together as one. And so I think it was a great school, but I can't imagine what it's like now. I mean, I see pictures in the local papers when I go and see my mum and dad of the progress flag and these ridiculous teachers pushing all this stuff, and I think, God, we didn't have. I mean, we were so busy trying to learn stuff that the idea that we would be doing this ideological stuff would have been absurd. But but you know, the teachers there now have completely different priorities.
Imagine that, being too busy being pushed to learn stuff.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
a it's a it was clearly an abusive school,
Oh, clearly, clearly.
clearly abusive school. But it is fascinating, isn't it, that you describe it as a rough school and say that you did classics. I mean, that
Yeah,
you know, you would say that to sort of anybody under the age of probably 40 now, or maybe he's even older than that. And it's almost incomprehensible that you would have a rough school and they might be teaching the classics.
yeah. It was Latin and Greek. I could do if I wanted. I could do Latin, Greek. We did German. I learned a bit of German, and I learned a bit of French. I mean, modern languages, as far as I know now, are quite, you know, not pushed quite so much in Scottish schools. I'm not sure, but I can't imagine Gaelic Academy offers French or German. They might offer you one.
Yeah, yeah, it's a definite issue. So how did you get from there to, so you went to Glasgow University. What did you study and how did you, I mean, it might be a long time. I don't know if it was immediate, but you end up being a television producer. So how's that happen?
Well, I think it was a series of accidents. I mean, I did my English and philosophy at Glasgow. I mean, just on the education thing, I think that there were two people in my entire year at Gaelic Academy who went to university. I mean, it was not common. And so, you know, now this whole idea that everybody goes to university. But I did it, Glasgow, I did the English and philosophy. I then did a sabbatical year as the SLC president, so I was sort of got involved in politics. I was a Labour candidate. I was a big lefty at the time, and then I went down to London to work because of my left wing interests. I got a job on Marxism Today, which was the official magazine of the Communist Party of Great Britain. Um, and you know, it was a intellectual powerhouse, Marxism Today. I mean, it's people sometimes say, "Oh, you mean living Marxism?" That was a different bunch of Trotskyists. Those were, and I never joined the Communist Party. They were very open to you know, people who weren't in the party. So Suzanne Moore was there as well. I think she was an arts editor, but she never joined the party either. I don't think Suzanne's ever joined the party, not knowingly. And so it was a real powerhouse. Martin Jakes was there, Stuart Hall. I didn't realize how lucky I was. I would come into the office, and Stuart Hall would be there, Eric Hobsbawm would be there, B. Campbell would be there, all chit chatting away. And it was fantastic. It was really interesting. And the ideas they were coming up with were really interesting too. I mean, Stuart Hall was the guy who invented the concept of Thatcherism. He coined the word. And what was interesting about Marxism today is they believed, and that's why they were so unpopular in the rest of the left. They really believed if you were going to get anywhere, you needed to understand how the conservatives had just trounced the left, and they needed to understand the appeal of Margaret Thatcher and how she jumped into, you know, working class minds, and had attracted, you know, a huge working class vote. And so you really need to work hard at that. And I think that's where I picked up the fact that you need to drill down into what's, you know, motivating people. I mean, I didn't understand much of what was going on. Now, you know, I'm reading Herbert Marcuse. They were talking about him, but I had no idea what they were talking about then. From that, and then working a little bit with trade union stuff, and I sort of, and can't remember exactly how, but I spoke to some guy at the BBC who was looking for people who had political contacts and business contacts, and I got my first job on a Channel 4 show as a researcher. And then, you know, in those days, if you were going to get a job in the media, you needed to have contacts or experience in the real world. It was completely different from now. I mean, when I then worked at a high level in a big production company, Menton, in London, I would get hundreds of CVs from people who'd say, "I've just done a media degree." And we would all say, "Oh, God, not another one." Because they're to a penny, and there are thousands. I think it's something like, is it 5,000 people graduate every year with a media degree? And it's so academic and it's so out of touch. And most of them never get employed because there are fewer and fewer jobs in the mainstream media. But in those days, television was booming. Margaret Thatcher had created Channel 4. And in the first years of Channel 4, it was, I mean, I worked for Diverse Productions, which was the first documentary out on Channel 4, which was an expose of welfare benefit fraud. And that was Channel 4. They wanted both the left and the right, and they wanted a real big tumble of ideas, which is partly why I was writing my Channel 4 thing, because it's such a betrayal of the original intent of the idea of creating diversity in those days. And Channel 4 was intellectual diversity and diversity of ideas. And now, Channel 4 is just so dumbed down. And I can't remember the last time they did a really shocking show that people thought was from the right. Maybe my friend Martin Durkin did the global warming.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's
That
probably
one.
that was probably the last time that he did. So it was a flawed show. It was, good stuff, but it had flaws as well. But that was a really shocking thing in the tradition of Channel 4. Now, partly because they've signed up to all these things like memorandums of understanding. I took an idea but maybe 10 years ago to Channel 4 to a commissioning editor that I knew, and it was about the myth of the trans brain. And she said we couldn't actually make this because and it was the first time I'd heard that it would breach our editorial guidelines. And I thought at the time that can't be true. But I then found out they actually, their editorial guidelines were you couldn't be what they described as transphobic. I wasn't being transphobic. It was an idea for a science documentary that analysed the notion of the trans brain, but it couldn't get through the filter. And then I discovered the same in the BBC. The BBC had then signed up to the same memoranda of understanding from the trans lobby, and you couldn't get things. And so it's a good example of how the ability to discuss the actions of the trans lobby, or indeed the whole idea of gender ideology, the ability was shrunk, and the sort of room for manoeuvre was made smaller and smaller. And if you can't question ideas, then of course these ideas get to they become the default.
Yeah, it's funny. As soon as you said diverse productions, I was going to crack a joke about, so it's your fault. But of course, you were talking about
And
diversity of ideas, which is what diverse always meant, didn't it? Um, but yeah, the global warming, global cooling. I remember that. I mentioned this partly because I just had a letter from a parent. No, it's a teacher, which I'm going to mention in the next Substack, not the one coming out tomorrow, but the one following. And this is a letter that he says has been sent to every teacher. I'm not sure if it has, but it certainly was in his school. And it's a letter from, I can't remember exactly, but one of the part of the education authorities telling schools and education directors that the Scottish Youth Parliament has said that they're very concerned about global warming, and schools should really start to incorporate global warming into their discussions. And there's like 5 bullet points, five kind of Maoist bullet points instructing schools what they must do. So I'm going to do a little expose
good.
on that in the next Substack. I'll send you a copy if you're interested, because it is very very Orwellian. I have to say, it's yeah.
I think most of us. I think most of us agree the planet is warming up. It's only about what do you do about it. I mean, to impoverish everybody, return them to the Stone Age. When the global warming isn't going to stop, and even if we all down tools tomorrow and did nothing, even if we all died tomorrow, apparently the global warming will continue for 3 decades, the minimum, maybe 5. You think, well, why would you then impoverish everybody and make it harder to tackle stuff with technology if it's going to get warmer anyway? No, my Substack is about, I don't know if you saw last week, maybe it was 2 weeks ago now, because the Supreme Court's got in the way, but it's either last week or the week before. There was a big report published, which the Times and other people talked about, and it was about global warming, but it was about how 2024 had been the warmest year ever in history, and they cited 2 or 3 disasters, including the floods in Valencia, as a prime example of the kind of disasters. Now, I don't know if you've been to Valencia, but if you walk through Valencia, there's a huge big space in the middle, which is now beautiful green space with gorgeous buildings, which was the river in Valencia, which kept flooding disastrously, killing hundreds of people every couple of decades. And so eventually the people in Valencia said, we're not having this anymore. So they rerouted the river. That's how, and it's the same river that flooded just in the other bit where it now flows. And I think, and so it's about the fact that, and I've gone through, and it turns out that Valencia as a city was founded by the Romans in like 70 AD, I think, or maybe BC, but maybe BC. And almost within a decade, there was a huge flood. It's been flooding since the city was founded. And yet we're supposed to believe that somehow this is to do with global warming. I just don't buy it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Right, so people feel free to ask Malcolm about anything they like, his past television production and so on. But we have to discuss the Supreme Court ruling. So, I mean, my take on this, partly because I'm always skeptical about judges making political decisions, which this feels a bit like to me, and it worries me that we end up becoming reliant on law, which is highly restrictive. And I suppose the key reason that I helped set up the Scottish Union for Education is that I think the people and the public, if you like, are key to everything. If you can get, if we could get 50, 60,000 parents and teachers shouting at the same time, things might change. And so that's always been my approach, and that's what we're trying to do, is to build up a kind of a mini mass movement of parents and teachers who point the finger at schools and say, excuse me, not for my kids, and not for the kids of Scotland. So that's my sort of back take on that. But having said that, and I know Marion, one of the four Women's Scotland women, she's a good sort. I think you mentioned she likes a drink, which is good because I also like a drink. So it was a good way to judge people. He says very prejudiced, but it's fantastic what's happened. It's having ramifications that I worried it wouldn't, because I thought people might say, or they might question it. They might, Jonathan Sumption came out and said, "Oh well, this is really something that councils can do if they want to, but they don't have to do." Whereas now Starmer's come out and recognised that women don't have penises. This man is a genius. And now what's his name? Swinney has come out likewise and said he's going to abide by the ruling. So this is all great. So I'd love to have your take on it. And if people want to start putting their hands up, if you want to, by putting your hand up, if you don't know, you go into the react thing, which is the heart at the bottom of your screen, and you can put your hand up, and a little yellow hand pops up, and I'll come round to you and I'll pick 3 or 4 people, and you can all chip in with questions and thoughts to Malcolm, because we do want to use this and use Malcolm and use your thoughts and imagination to try and discuss what does this mean and what should we do in general around the trans question. I think that's entirely legitimate to think about that, but also specifically in relation to schools, which I've always thought is the biggest, most horrible dimension of the trans issue, which is that children are essentially being taught that they might be transgender, and are then encouraged to essentially follow that direction. So I'm very keen to, how can we piggyback on what's happening and run with this. Anyway, so just any thoughts at all, Malcolm?
Another court case today, or another judgment today, wasn't there, about single-sex spaces in schools, which is brilliant. And I think the Marion, Susan, and Trina, their fingerprints are all over that as well. I think it was their case. I haven't read it carefully, but I saw somewhere that Marion was saying it was their case too. So they've just been astonishing, haven't they? I mean, a three woman army, not a one woman army, a 3 woman army. And so, I mean, obviously, I think it'll filter down into schools in terms of single sex spaces. The problem, I mean, I'm not convinced by Starmer. I mean, for obvious reasons. I mean, he's just such a fibber. as are so many of them. I mean, with the exception of West Streeting, who you feel is being honest about the journey he's gone on to change his opinion. I mean, I don't think West Streeting would have ever claimed that, what I said in the past was entirely what I'm now saying. He said, I've changed my view. And if Starmer had said that, it would just have been so much more, he would have come across as much more trustworthy. And I would feel that there wasn't some but in there. And I think there's a but in there. I think that they're under a lot of pressure from LGBTQ activists to do a payback. So it'll be the conversion therapy ban or some other sort of area of the trans agenda that will turn up. But also, that I really, you hone in on exactly what they're saying, and he says he didn't. His spokespersons accepted that trans women were men, but he's never said that. He just says trans women, no, sorry, women are a biological adult female. Fine. But I know that India Willoughby considers himself to be a biological female. There's a whole part of the trans ideology that says, like Lady Carbisdale, Samantha Kane up in the north of Scotland, the trans activist, who argued on the Channel 4 show that once he started taking all the hormones, every cell in my body became female. I think, well, okay, so if you're going to say that only biological females can use single-sex spaces for women, then India Willoughby and Lady Carbisdale are two off the back that I know would argue that they have the right to be there. And so, there's still a lot of vagueness there. And as you say, there's a whole bunch of other people. I got sent something from Dorset. There's a museum in Dorset that made an announcement today. It actually just said, we will be ignoring this, and you will still be able to go to the restroom of your, gender identity. And I think that's the bigger problem, is that a whole bunch of institutions will just ignore it, think that they won't be taken to court. And do people have I suppose we'll all just have to take them all to court. But it's a huge effort. So there's the vagueness and the idea of the biology, and if you're not willing to absolutely be crystal clear, Starmer saying, I thank the court for this clarification, but he himself is very vague and obscure in his discussion about this. And also, why did it take him 6 days to talk about it? When was it the next day after an episode of Adolescence? He was all over the place and calling the producers into Downing Street and saying, we must do something. And in this, all he's doing, this huge judgment that everyone's talking about, and he takes 6 days to say anything and then just thanks them for clarification. There's something, your antennae can't help but be set off by his vagueness and his tardiness.
Yeah, I mean, I just, before I bring anyone else in, if people have got any questions, I mean, one of the things I find quite interesting. So I'm a sociologist, and one of the themes that I'm interested in is the question of authority. Partly because I think that there is a lack of authority, as in political authority, religious authority, any kind of public, meaningful, collective authority, I think is really lacking today, which is actually ironically why you end up getting so much identity obsession, because we're left to ourselves in our narcissistic culture, as Christopher Lash says. But one of the things I think is interesting about what's happened is this ruling, and this is from both sides. So this is from Starmer, but also people who are allies in terms of questioning transgender ideology. And that is the Supreme Court ruling is given a sense of authority, so that people now speak about the Supreme Court ruling in a way that is kind of like it's proof. Like this shows this is now meaning, this is now demonstrates, this is so on. And I find it kind of fascinating and a little bit unnerving that something that we know is true, which is sex is biological, kind of almost feels like you need the rubber stamp of the Supreme Court to
So
have a
I
sense of authority about it, which I'm not trying to be dismissive about this significance, but it's
think probably it's been picked up, but the Supreme Court itself was really clear that all they were doing, I think he even in his mini statement, I think he emphasized this is not a comment on wider social stuff. It's only about the meanings within the Equality Act. Um, and so, and within that, I think that they did a great job because the previous court cases were all about trying to work out what does this bloody badly thought through and really badly written law, what does it mean? And I think it's okay for, I think obviously it's okay, it's good for judges. That's what they're there is to interpret what Parliament intended. And essentially, they were saying there is no way on earth that when the people wrote this, they intended for males to be in women's spaces, because then why would you even have single sex spaces? It doesn't make any sense. And so I put that's fine. I agree with you that we can't now base everything else just on this one judgment. They were. It's just that the Equality Act itself needed to be clarified. It needed to be clarified what it meant, and that they did a really good job. But now everybody else is sort of trying to work out, some motivation in there. I thought it was a really well argued, well presented. It's credit to the British legal system that
mm,
that it analyzes a law to try and work out what the hell people meant. If
yeah.
Parliament had been clearer, it wouldn't need this.
Yeah, I mean, see again, but I mean, I could entirely be wrong about this, but I think if this court case had got to the Supreme Court 5 years ago, it might have been a different outcome because the public weight and the sense of what the whole trans issue was about, the rapists in prisons, the boxers, the
Yeah.
J.K. Rowlings, everything. That's why I think public pressure is so important, and what all the different groups and individuals like yourself have done is so important, because I'm not sure that the Supreme Court would have come to the same decision 5 years ago.
I'm not sure, but I think the other way around is that I'm not sure there was enough of a even gender critical people in the wider movement. It's taken people time for it all to click into place. Trina spotted this in 2018 from For Women Scotland, that the implications of the decision to allow any person to identify so that they could be on a board as a woman. But all the language and the background and the history, I think it took time for the gender critical movement to sort of get a full picture of what it was up against. And then the arguments that Michael Farran from Sex Matters and all the different people that I can't remember the name of the barrister for LGBT Alliance, that they were huge documents with enormous references that you really you needed to have time to have developed this. There is now a body of opinion and a body of legal opinion now on the gender critical side that there just wasn't anything like that 4 or 5 years ago. And so I think that's why we're beginning to win all these cases, because go in there and actually the other side hasn't a chance. And the things that were being said by the Scottish government's lawyers were so appalling, so weak, so rubbish that I didn't know that it was going to work, but I was pretty confident that we would win. Easy to say that now. You never know.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Okay, I've got Alex and Kate. I'll bring them both in. If you want to unmute yourselves, and I will try and spotlight you both. So if other people have any questions or thoughts, put your little yellow hands up, and I'll come to you, Alex.
Malcolm, thanks. Not just for now, but for the last couple of years. One thing you just said a wee minute ago made me think, my God, what a sad indictment of the political class that we had to get here. So I always feel like I have to preface my comments when I talk about this to say it's a good thing what's just happened. It's a good thing. So please take that as read, even though I still have lots of concerns. And the concerns are around, I might be getting categories mixed up or making them up, but this ruling, as I understand it, is a structural question. And I think that the bigger problem is a cultural question. Now, having listened to you tonight and been thinking about it in the last however long, I think there has been a cultural shift. I think Stuart was alluding to it there when he talks about the amount of people who have got involved and became more public about the argument. So I'm a bit more optimistic at the minute around the trans question in schools, the ideology in schools, because I think there has been a cultural shift. But the worry or my worry remains, that because the emphasis is still placed on a structural question, i.e., the law, are we just going to all end up in court constantly? So I guess my question is, what balance to put on this, Malcolm? Because as significant as this is, and although I think I'm acknowledging a cultural shift, I'm not convinced that the culture around this issue, especially among our political elite, especially in our cultural institutions, I'm not sure it's changed that much. So it's going to be a real slog, I think. And my interest in the Scottish Union for education is outlined by Stuart, where I think we need to get the public more involved in this, relying less on, the court's lawfare, and what faith I've got in politicians is so thin that it might be non-existent. So I think we need to concentrate on the cultural question. Our arguments need to be better and they need to be more widespread. So I just wonder, Malcolm, where you see the vibe at the minute. Are we starting to win the argument? I don't mean among the Supreme Court. I mean among ordinary people.
Yeah, I'll bring Malcolm in a sec. I'll bring Kate in, then you can answer them both, so we can try and get as many people in as possible. Kate.
So I think what you refer to there, Alex, and what we've been speaking about in terms of the culture, a cultural shift needing to happen, because something I also noticed off the back of the announcement was many of my former arts colleagues making public pronouncements, like you refer to, that they were not in any way going to follow this ruling because they see this as their Rosa Parks moment. They see this as a great injustice that is happening, and this is their time to sit on the bus, right? And so what needs, and in that way, I think your work as a writer is so vital. You come from a media background, you know the power of stories, because what we're dealing with here is an emperor's new clothes situation, right? Wherein people who have gone along as trans allies have been brought into the illusion through the power of storytelling that they are doing something very good. Obviously, there are predators and there are other people, but I think largely there are people who have been brought into this illusion that they're doing something really good. And something that occurred to me in the past week is what we're dealing with, taking out the Isla Bracens, okay? Let's just look at let's look at the gay lad who's been told that he was a female because he's graceful, right? And he's friends with the whole cohort of other young people who feel loyalty to him. The way I look at it, he's an addict, right? What they're doing is they're enabling an addiction, which is going to destroy his body. It's the same exact thing you would see with a heroin addict, right? It's the same exact that kind of desperation for the fix to be able to do things, and they will lie and they will deceive in order to get their fix through drugs, as it turns out. But actually what it's doing is destroying their body. And I think for me, what we need to do is we need to become, and what you do so masterfully in your storytelling, is expose the lie that is inherent through the personal stories of the people involved in this. And for me, it's about, we need to get more of those stories in so that we can help people to, and kids and teachers, to develop more a sense of discernment. So yeah, because I just think it is the cultural shift really that needs to happen.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Well, I mean, I agree. I would only say that I don't think there's any one way more than any other. I mean, at an early stage, LGB Alliance, we realized in one of our brainstorms that all we had to do really was copy. If we wanted to know how to change things, then we needed to work out what the trans lobby had done. And so they secretly went into the law and, you know, the little Denton's thing, behind the scenes, engineering things, reinterpreting the law, telling people the law was going to change, so they might as well do this. So on the legal front, we've got no option but to go, you know, lawfare the way they did and sort of deconstruct all the crap that they built up. But then culturally, as you were saying, the whole power of narrative, which has been such a big feature of the transgender lobby, telling these stories. I mean, it's a sort of almost religious story of I was reborn, you know, I was born in the wrong body and now I'm the new authentic. And they hit on a whole bunch of sort of tropes that are embedded into our culture, and they create these powerful narratives that really appeal to people. And so we've got no other option but to create new, better narratives, and also to deconstruct the ones that they managed to get, you know, popularized. And so, and I think everybody's got different skills, isn't it? I mean, the gender critical movement, if you like, has constructed this incredible army of top quality, you know, barristers and lawyers, from Peter Daly, who's done loads of stuff for us, and Aqua Reindorf. I mean, they are stellar. And so, and they've got the wind in their sails, and so I think they're going to help destroy a lot of the stuff that the trans lobby created. But then culturally, I think it's going to be it's harder, because you can see what J.K. Rowling comes up against, and she's, you know, should be, you would think, untouchable, you know, in terms of scale and wealth and everything else, and yet they're constantly at her, and I can't quite. The thing about law is you go in there and you get to argue your case, and the judge has to listen and blah blah blah. There's no structure, if you like, where cultural narratives are judged by everybody. It's the market, and so it's much harder, I think, for in the cultural sphere, for our narratives to get pushed. There's so many people who don't want to be heard.
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you. Penny. There we go. I think you should be able to do it now.
Okay. Thanks. Malcolm, I've seen you sort of say online a few times that the trans women that have been complaining about the ruling over the last few days and have been out on the streets, they kind of make our argument for us in the sense that their behavior is so despicable and not just aggressive, but ridiculous, you know, chanting, we want wombs and we want titties and this kind of thing. That they kind of, it's almost as if they're not the target. They've been the focus of attention,
Yeah.
and they obviously are creating a problem in terms of women-only spaces. But it seems to me that we need to now get a strategy within the media to refocus, because the media seem to be very reluctant to address this issue, and they've now after a lot of lobbying started the mainstream media to address this issue. But it seems to me the voices of young detransitioners are kind of still completely absent from the debate, and somehow a recognition that in fact trans women are really not the main issue as far as I'm concerned. And actually, we need to be really concerned about the fact that because schools have been peddling this nonsense for the last 5 years, supported by the Scottish government, we've now got a lot of young women who really believe that they've been born in the wrong body. And I'm not quite sure how we do that. I think we could maybe try and campaign in teacher training colleges, but I think there's a much bigger problem for us to debunk the whole idea of born in the wrong body. I'm interested in how you think we might do that. So how do we give a bigger voice to detransitioners, and how do we try and open up the discussion so that young women understand what's happened to them, and how do we get teachers to be more open?
Yeah, I'll bring Malcolm in, I'll bring Jenny and James in. If anyone else has got any questions, even if it's just like simple questions, not, because everyone, I know a lot of the people that are speaking at the minute, and they talk a lot, which is fine. This is fine because they're interesting people. But if you've just got little questions, do feel free to just pop in and ask anything you like. But I would just like to back that up what Penny's just said there, Malcolm, because as far as I understand, is 70% of kids who are transitioning are girls, and the entirely understandable largely feminist-led challenge that we've seen focuses on the issue of trans women, i.e. men, and women's spaces and so on, but that doesn't work with the question of girls wanting to be boys and men, which is it's arguably a bigger issue because there's more of them, and it seems to be a thing. So anyway, I'd be very interested in if you've done any work on that, if you plan to, because it just seemed to be a massive thing. Jenny.
Yeah, I mean, just following on from some of the comments that other people have made, to raise two problems that we face, I think, and one possible suggestion for getting out of it. I mean, for us in Sue, the greatest problem is the fact that LGBT Youth Scotland is so integrated into the school system. They've been given carte blanche to go into every school, even primary schools now, we know, and all under the cover of providing inclusive LGBT education, right? So it's all couched in terms of the inclusivity and diversity and everything else. They've also been joined by Thai, who are on about bullying. And these are things that they really push. Just how LGBT people are so threatened. They're so bullied. There's, a lot of them will commit suicide, etc., etc. All of these tropes mean that schools are just rife with it. And we know that the guidance, the Scottish Government guidance is really authorising teachers to affirm any kid or any adolescent. So that combination of all of this indoctrination and adult affirmation is obviously having a very serious effect. That's the one thing. The other problem, I think, is you just have to look at what has happened to the Cass report to know that we are facing some very real difficulties, right? The government endorses Cass, the Scottish government endorsed Cass, right? And things stay the same. What's happening in Scotland is that the gender identity services are populated by clinicians who are completely committed to affirmative gender care. In addition to which, of course, the children who are ready to go into the adult service will go straight into hormone treatment and surgical treatment, right? So CAS has not had an impact here because people have paid lip service to it, but nothing's happened. And all of the psychotherapeutic clinicians and psychiatrists are completely endorsing, affirmation. So we're in real trouble as far as actually turning a tide. And I think we can do it obviously through parental pressure around things like sex education, because that is something that parents are a bit preoccupied. And a lot of parents are prepared to stick their necks out and withdraw their pupils. But the other question I keep struggling with is this is a social contagion, but it doesn't involve every adolescent. How do we address adolescents intellectually and emotionally? Because if the peers of people who are caught up in this are actually beginning to put forward arguments against and becoming, if you like, a third force in schools, then possibly we can at least form a barrier for some of these people, some of these kids and also adolescents who are caught up in this situation.
Thanks, Johnny. And James.
Malcolm, thanks for joining us. I hope people confirm that they can hear me clearly. My microphone is often weird. So look, I agree. This feels like an Emperor's New Clothes moment. It feels like this has blown everything wide open, and people that were previously too worried to say what the Supreme Court ruling said shouldn't fear saying it now. So hopefully some floodgates may open there. And it's clear that things are moving fast. There'll have to be a lot of effort now by organizations like Forward Scotland and the LGB Alliance to make sure that this stuff is implemented and that policies do actually change. But it seems that one way forward that might be open to us is to notice that the groups that have effectively, well, they've created this problem, but they've also put themselves as the caring umbrella organizations that look after these children. They've utterly failed them. The people in their care they have just done such harm to. Their overzealous lies have given people the impression that they have rights and entitlements that they don't have. People, adults, may have transitioned on the basis that they would like to have these things, and they don't have them. They never did. Children will be very confused. The whole born in your own body, choose your own sex, affirming, it's just a lot of confusion, a lot of chaos has been caused. And so I think we need to realize that these organizations aren't caring for these people, particularly children now, I'm talking about in schools. They're abusers. And I think what we should try to do is separate those organizations from those children, possibly by highlighting the harm they've done, encouraging trans and gender non-conforming kids, insofar as that category might need a rethink now, to leave those organizations behind. And perhaps we need an organization, or at least an attitude, which steps in and supports and cares for these kids. Not the crazy grown-up people with placards around their necks saying that they'd like to, well, we saw them in Dundee over the weekend, right? All around the country over the weekend. Not those people, but the children who are actually harmed by this. I remember a teacher telling me a few years ago that this battle can't be won now because these people exist, and their parents will never backpedal because they'll almost never have to, they'll never be able to acknowledge that they've done the harm to their children that they have. And we need to hold those activist organizations to account. And then we move on and care for these kids with all that we can muster. Just as we would for, Kate mentioned a drug addict, right? Or the victims of thalidomide. They were inadvertently harmed by a system that was trying to help them and their families. And it looks to me like what's opening up in front of us is there's no one sensible that will look after that group of people. So if you look at it from the protected characteristics, you have Forward Scott effectively looking after the sex protected characteristic on organizations like Forward Scott. LGB Alliance and friends looking after the sexuality protected characteristic. And the gender reassignment one, I think we need the emergence of a caring, realist organization to take care, in particular, of children, but also of adults. Effectively, the detransitioner crowd, we need an organization to look after them. It doesn't look to me like there is that organization. And it might be nice for us to at least have that tone that we care deeply about these kids. But we can't let the old institutions continue, and nobody should be listening to them anymore. We should discredit them and replace them with an organization that actually cares about children in the new world after the Supreme Court's ruling. Thank you.
Great. Great. Thanks very much, James. That was a lot, Malcolm. So just anything, you might not be allowed to everything, but anything that strikes you there.
Order. I mean, I obviously totally agree these LGBTQ groups shouldn't be in schools at all. I'm not sure if it's a really difficult one, this idea of an organization that's caring for, see if you have an organization that advertise itself as looking in a rational way for treating rationally non-binary kids. Well, I mean, what you've done is you've suggested there are non-binary kids, and so it's a really hard one. I think there needs to be an organization, maybe not interfacing with children, but interfacing maybe yours or a sister or brother organization that focuses on these troubled cohort of troubled children I mean, most of them are autistic, most of them have mental health comorbidities. I think it was Jenny maybe who was saying that, it's funny how the vast majority of adolescents don't get caught up in this. It's this small troubled minority who are very interior looking, who are quite autistic and maybe on the spectrum. There were always kids like this in our own backgrounds in schools. There was always the outsiders, the nerds or whatever. And there needs to be some way for them to find an identity that suits them, that is not caught up and exploited by these organizations which only have their own interests at heart. I mean, this is a money-making machine for them. But I'm not sure what that organization is. I mean, on what Penny was saying about the detransition, I mean, I completely agree. The detransition of stories are really important, and the detransition group are really important. LGB Alliance is, although it has focused a lot on the single-sex space issue, because that affects lesbians most of all, of the LGB people, they have spent a lot of time. And I would think that most of the founders or the people who were involved at an early stage like me would say that was our number one motivation in getting involved, was the kids who, and girls in particular. It was that, I think, I don't think we published it yet, but there was I did an interview with Bev Jackson, and it was for Bev and Kate, the two founders of LGBT Alliance. It was the shift from trans woman to these much younger kids, the vast bulk of whom were girls, that was their reason for getting involved. And I think although because it seems like we're more concerned about the single-sex spaces because you've got something to do with that. There's a law that you can get clarified. It's a much vaguer, harder to work out what to do problem when you're talking about these girls that are being screwed up by LGBTQ groups. I mean, we set up a helpline, or LGBT Alliance set up a helpline, and it's doing quite well. Some people criticise it because it's from 13 to 25, which is very similar to the LGBT Youth Scotland. But of course, we don't interact personally with. It's only a helpline, and so we worked out that actually, it was from a child and child safeguarding. People are all over the helpline, and so it's a very different scenario from going into schools with material. The one thing that always worries me about the detransition issue is, and I think this is what we're going to move on to quite soon in the public debate, if you like, is that I think there's a study being done, and we're trying to get a study of is being funded into the regret rates in detransitioning. The problem I keep alerting people and saying that I don't think the regret rate will be as high as people think. because the whole thing about a social contagion and the whole thing about a placebo, I mean, this is a social contagion, a medical issue where the placebo effect is absolutely central to the experience. These are kids who have done this to themselves, who chose to or were encouraged to do this to themselves. They then do these things to themselves, like girls who take testosterone. Testosterone being a drug that actually affects you mentally and gives you this sort of great feeling, this surge of sort of powerful feelings. So they get that, and then if they then end up with physical effects, there's the incentives are all on the side of believing you did the right thing. Maybe there are a few problems, but the incentive to saying the incentive for saying that you did the wrong thing and you screwed up your body and you made a terrible mistake, it's really hard for people to do that. And so that's why I think, there's not a huge number of detransitioners. They're a very select group, usually, really smart, who really worked it all through. And they have been, and strong personalities have been willing to say, and angry, as well, about what was done to them. But I think the bulk of the bulk of the people who went through so-called transition, I think it will be hard to make them express regret, and then it becomes an ethical issue. I'm trying to remember his name now. It'll come back to me. But he wrote, and we did a panel together, and it was him who said that, do we really want? I mean, it's a moral dilemma. We want detransitioners to feel so angry that they speak out because they'll help other kids. But we don't, or do we want ourselves to be making people realize that they made a mistake because they're going to be really unhappy? These are these kids who screwed things up, they're 21, 22. And do we want to go and say, are you really sure you did the right thing? Aren't you feeling really sad about what you did? Well, I mean, that's a terrible thing to do to people. And so we have to find a language and a way to interact with these people that isn't about making them feel miserable, because that's ethically really problematic. But we do want to amplify the voices of people who come forward and say that they made a mistake.
Okay, thank you, Catherine.
Hiya, mine's just a very quick question, actually. And I guess so I'm a social worker by trade, and worked in child protection. So I guess I'd be curious to know about what your thoughts are on the interface between education and the authority of parents, because what it seems to be is that sort of the state is overreaching into family life, and that seems to have the biggest hold. And I'm just wondering if you think that some of this is about the backlash to gentle parenting in terms of a sort of conflict between the authority of parents.
Do you mean, so Catherine, do you mean that it's because state overreach, which is obviously has happened here, is fueling the backlash? Is that what you mean?
So I guess what I'm saying is that looking into the topic is that parents have almost become afraid to assert, actually, no, I'm not going to call you Sally, your name is John. That kind of authority and boundaried parts of the home seem to have become disintegrated. And I wondered if what you thought in terms of that interface between the parent and education clash, I suppose.
Yeah, that's very. I'm interested in that as well, but I'll bring the other in because we'll run out of time, Al, because I know you. Ruth.
Yeah, I don't know if it's exactly a question, but just to say as well, having a daughter that's 5 years in, who believes she's male, I don't know if this is any useful feedback, but she's been fairly calm about the Supreme Court ruling. But it is very much, there was many kids of her age group caught up in this, including a friend who identifies as trans female. And the comment my daughter made was something about how come they're talking so much about trans women, why does nobody mention trans males? And I think that might be quite a good point. And what she said was that when she said, I was first to come out in school and people treated I'll not say the name, but my friend who came out as a trans woman differently. So it's almost as if maybe when the girls come out, they're like, oh, well, of course, and nobody questions it, but maybe it's a bit more shocking somehow when the boys come out. And I don't know, yeah, it's just obviously, I agree with what Malcolm says, that I think when they get to 18 plus that age, it's down to the young people, like they need the time. It's taken some of them 5 years to get in, and it might, for example, for my own, take another 5 years till she goes, oh, hold on a minute. And it's so there's quite a big timeline, I think, in terms of what's been going over the last 5 years and where it goes next. But yeah, I suppose my question is as well, just what's next as well. That's kind of what I feel about it.
Okay. Thanks, Diane. You need to unmute. Oh.
Yeah. Hi. I'm Diane. I'm on the SUV editorial team. I'm a cancelled librarian and academic because I spoke out about this stuff. So I am now a full-time journalist for UK Column. So if you ever want to contribute to UK Column or write anything for us, I'd be happy to talk with you because I'm also the commissioning editor. I think some of this would be really helpful for our audience. But anyway, with my librarian eyes on, I would like to just make sure that you are aware of how bad it is in the libraries at the moment. And it's something to watch for you as well, that you might want to watch as for part of your Substack contributions. And if LGB Alliance can help me with any of this advocacy work, because I'm quite involved in it, both in Scotland and with groups in England and Northern Ireland and Wales as well. So I'm trying to get everyone together. In the US right now, it's actually in the Supreme Court that a group of parents in Maryland went to at the Supreme Court because they were protesting the contents of the books, the library books, and the fact that they are required to show them to the students. And this particular county is religiously diverse, so like true diversity, right? So there's like a group of Ukrainian Orthodox people, Muslims, and Catholics, I think it is. One other, anyway, 3 different religions of parents saying that because they don't want this to be taught to their children, and saying that their denial to freedom of religion and to having control over what their children are put for in school is against their religious beliefs. So I just want everyone to be aware of the Supreme Court case. So if there's any work that you can do, because you're a much bigger group than we are, or that I am, can help raise awareness, because I want the states ahead of us right now here in the UK. So I'm an American Canadian permanently residing here. But what I think we need to do is to kind of show where they're ahead over there, because they're bigger and they're more organized. And I'm hoping that maybe if we can get more exposure for these things, it will motivate more parents to do more over here. So I just wanted to add that as a comment, sort of.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Over to you, Malcolm.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know enough about libraries, and I'd be really interested to know more about it. I'm sure LGB Alliance would be interested. I mean, I'm loosely associated with LGB Alliance now. I'm not so involved. I came off the management team just because it was taking too much time. But I mean, I'm still obviously, talk to them all the time. So I can definitely put you in touch, and they'd be really interested.
Okay, great.
On the Ruth's point about the the whole idea of these new identities that these kids, dream up and attach to. I'm maybe I'm just congenitally optimistic, but I actually think, in a funny way, the whole non-binary thing, even though of course it's nonsense, but because it doesn't really require medicalization, you can be non-binary and you don't have to take testosterone. I think it actually might be in the same way that the transsexual identity for a lot of so-called trans-identified men became so problematic because they realized that they'd actually have to have surgery to be a full transsexual. That's one of the reasons that it sort of morphed into this trans-identified transgender thing, where you didn't really have to do that. You don't have to go the full hog, you just took hormones or whatever. And I actually think that in a funny way, it continues to evolve, and that the non-binary thing is actually a way of making it even more acceptable, i.e., cutting out the medicalisation. And frankly, I think if kids wanted to call themselves non-binary, nobody would care. But as long as long, because you know that eventually they're going to grow out of it, because it's not something they can be trapped in. And so, it's annoying when, is it The Last of Us, the new Sky, or the second series of the Sky, sci-fi series, and the lead actress in this is non-binary. She's very loudly non-binary, and so it irritates the hell out of me. But then I was thinking, well, it's so much better than that. Is it Elliot Page or whatever she's now called? Who looks so miserable and showed off her mutilated chest and everything. That is on one side is a disaster. The fact that an actress on a big series calls herself non-binary. I mean, most of my friends have got a non-binary child of some description, and all it is they're either a bit butch or a bit camp, depending on what sex they are. I mean, obviously, it's still a trap, and it's still a sort of like gateway into the whole madness. But I'm hoping that the non-binary stuff is almost like a sort of a correction that will end up being much healthier. And I'm not sure whether we can create identities for these kids or encourage them. Whenever an adult tries to do that, it usually backfires. And so, and most of the time that kids, grab onto these identities, it's a way to oppose their parents and to annoy their parents and to shock their parents. And so in a way, maybe they just want us to continue to be shocked and appalled by the fact that they're non-binary. The last thing they want you to do is, oh, good, I'm really pleased that you're non-binary, because that would infuriate them. But I don't know. And on Catherine's point about parental rights, absolutely. I mean, it's so weird that LGBT Alliance is like probably the strongest organisation when it comes to parental rights I've ever come across. Partly because Bev has kids. And Kate Barker, who's the CEO, she and her partner adopted 2 boys, and because Kate was herself an adopted child, and so she's really strong on parental rights, and so is Bev, and so is everybody else generally. But I think you feel it from them because they've been through the experience of being mothers themselves, and I think it's a real sign of, a good sign that there's a because gay organisations, it wasn't that we were against parental rights in the past, but there was a sense that the family was a problematic thing that was really embedded in certainly the Gay Liberation Front and a lot of the early lefty versions of gay rights. But that and that has been inherited by that sort of discomfort, at the very least, with the nuclear family, has been inherited by the LGBTQ lobby. But it's a good sign. I think there's a whole sort of reaction against that by LGBT Alliance, but lesbian groups, and a whole bunch of other groups, including feminist groups. And again, feminists used to be a little bit, anti-nuclear family, and it's the patriarchy and all this. Now you have a wider selection of women's rights, gay rights people who are out seeing that actually the modern version of the family, it's only, 30 years ago that they got rid of the law that allowed a man to rape his wife and everything. I mean, I think Julia Hartley Brewer was talking about this in her own lifetime. A man was legally allowed to rape his wife. So that was a patriarchal family, 4 decades ago, maybe. That's the nuclear family 4 decades ago. This is a nuclear family now. It's a very different beast, and therefore I think it's become quite progressive to defend the family, because it's the only way that you can ensure child safeguarding.
Yeah, great. Right, now I think John wants to ask a question. I know this will have to be the last one. John, do you?
Yes, if I may. Am I making speech? I've had trouble trying to make myself seen because the pictures are not.
We can see you. Okay,
very, very briefly then. Thanks to Catherine for bringing in the family element. The reason I'm here is because I went to a meeting held by Stuart some years back, and I was amazed to find it was populated by couples concerned about the quality of education for their children and how to make their feelings felt without uncomfortable ramifications. my question actually is, I think there's another cultural shift and we've all ignored it. And I may be totally out of step in bringing it up. And that is that the mother's place is in the home, bringing up her children. Now, I know that that's old hat and frowned upon, but it is the fundamental flaw in our society. We've abandoned religion and the relationship of husband and wife. We no longer have a steady background, and we have abdicated our role in bringing up children. Now, having said that, I have a number of very good friends, ladies who have been extremely successful in business and have brought up families. So it is possible to run them both together, but not that often. I think the cultural shift that we are seeing now, and we're trying to enhance it, we've missed the boat. The cultural shift we really want to start again is that the mother's place is in the home, bringing up our children. Sorry,
Right.
folks.
That's okay. Thank you, John.
Publicly ascribe to that idea. I think it would go down like a lead balloon, unfortunately. But I think there's a wider point, which I think it hints at, which is that the idea of delegating parenthood to technology, in the case of phones and stuff, and delegating parenthood generally to outside forces, will eventually, if there are organized pressure groups that are, infesting your schools, you're going to end up, they're going to try and influence your children. And sure, I mean, we there needs to be, unfortunately, the economics of everything is that, it's not going to happen. But I think there's definitely something there in security for children, whoever's providing it, whether it's male, female, or whatever, and ensuring that outside forces. And I think all this talk about banning phones is a hell. I mean, it's healthy, and I think Kevin Badenoch has embraced the idea, and at least we're beginning to realise that there is a problem here. I think it's Abigail Schreier. I saw somebody, I think it was Kate mentioned Abigail Schreier. I think it's Abigail Schreier who pointed out that the problem of all this gender contagion stuff, gender identity contagion, started in 2010, which was the year, I think it's 2010, I might be wrong, but the year when the new super duper iPhone was released, and that smartphones and the spread of these ideas seem to, I don't think it's just a correlation.
Yeah. I mean, I'm much more of a feminist than John in terms of women's position in society. But I mean, like Catherine, the point Catherine's raising, I do think there is a real issue in terms of the idea of parental authority and a society that celebrates and promotes parental authority and steps back. That's a thing I think could be really, really important if you could get some kind of both political and cultural framework where it is absolutely promoted that parents are the authority figures of their children, right, in every way. And obviously you hear it most from more conservative people who've got a religious background, but I think you could make that argument from all sorts of perspectives. I mean, just a couple of things I'll throw in just before you go, Malcolm, is that, I mean, for example, it's the thing that often shocked me about the trans stuff in school, which this was my starting point to challenge it, was to say, well, transgenderism is a controversial issue. Controversial issues should not be taught as fact in school, right? So it shouldn't be in primary schools. If you want to debate it in high schools, that's entirely legitimate, but it is not a debate at the minute. It is a thing that's fitted around safeguarding and bullying, and you cannot question. And I'm wondering if this is now a space to say, well, can we bring Malcolm into your school, for example, or bring Jenny into your school, or bring Catherine into your school, or bring John into your school, bring lots of people into your school and have a debate, right? Have a debate on this subject, because you should not, on basic liberal educational grounds, be promoting an ideology that is so profoundly against what a lot of people think. On top of that, I'm also interested, if people want to email us, I would be interested in trying to get a group together to see what we can do in the next month to 6 weeks to put pressure on schools, because I do think this is a window. And I think we can contact schools, email schools, make them aware that this has happened, make them recognize that they need to question this. So if there's anybody out there that would be interested in helping with this, just email me. I think you have my BT Open World one, or email me at info@sue.scott. But anyway, any final thoughts, Malcolm?
I'm not sure how. I mean, I've got friends who are on the board of governors of schools in London. I don't know if it's the same in Scotland. Do big comprehensives have parent governors? I don't know. I would have thought it would be easier to get to the to meet parent governors or go around schools like that or talk to the management of schools than. I know there would be a picket if I went to school, and if there's a big gender critical figure. I mean, you could have a debate, perhaps. That's the way to do it, maybe. In my day, way back, we had an amazing debating society at our school, and we used to invite people in. Again, I don't know to what extent, the average school has that. I'm sure there are good schools that do that. Yeah, I mean, definitely now is the moment to strike in terms of the implications of, especially since all the lobby groups are running around with their headless chickens trying to work out what the hell are we going to do now. And I would have thought that the point is they've been being advised by organisations. They have organisations in the school regularly which take stances that the Supreme Court has just shown are wrong. And so, do you want to hear from people who've been saying what the Supreme Court has been saying for the last, blah, blah, blah? I know that LGB Alliance is taking that stance now. They're using it to say, look, told you so. And how is it right that you've still got these organisations who haven't, Stonewall still hasn't made a statement yet. It's digesting the impact, blah, blah, blah. I don't think there are any major LGBT organisations which have yet put out a statement because they don't know what to say.
Yeah, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Say.
Yeah, it's nice for them to shut up for once.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Malcolm. Thank you everyone for coming and your questions. Please do get in touch. When Malcolm gets 100 messages from the Glasgow schools that they're happy to have him come in and debate with him, he can blame me for that. But let's see.
Society has really changed.
Great.